you ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome back to Visiting the Village, the weekly podcast where we discuss the wide and gaudy array of gaming tomfoolery. I'm joined as ever by the incorrigible Ian Hardingham.
Hello Mr. Paul Kilduff-Taylor. I've taken some performance enhancing drugs and now I'm ready to talk about video games.
Let's get out of this dungeon.
It's The Top Story.
The world's largest esports organisation, ESL, are to introduce random drug testing next month after a top player confessed to taking Adderall, which is an amphetamine, during a recent event. The exact details regarding the testing of banned substances are yet to be revealed. Ian Hardingham, have esports now passed the final hurdle to becoming real sports?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the final hurdles. Adderall is not only a drug that is used in esports, it's something that's used in quite a lot of pro sports. It's an amphetamine, as you mentioned. The UK version of it is Ritalin. It's generally prescribed to young people with ADHD, and from all reports, it does a fantastic job of giving you focus. Now, as someone who spends a lot of his life procrastinating and wasn't very good at revising for exams, I can only imagine how addictive that would be, and yeah. I think it's genuinely a bad thing for people to be using when they don't absolutely need it. We talked to Visiting the Village medical consultant Joe Clacy about it. He said that Adderall and things like it are not particularly physically addictive, but they're very dependency forming, which adds up to the same thing, really. So I think it's something that probably needs to be banned.
I think the reaction to this has been proportional. So ESL have said they're going to introduce randomised drug testing, which, to be fair, I think should have been going on a long time ago. But I think they've stepped up and they've done the right thing here. I agree with you. I don't think people should be taking Adderall for gaming purposes. It's a drug that has a very specific use and is quite widely abused. And I think in a professional context like this, clamping down on it, giving players a big disincentive to use it, you might get tested, you might get banned, is a really good thing. And esports have got to step up now. There's a lot of money involved, there's a lot of people watching, there's a lot of young people watching, so there's the kind of example thing going on there as well. I think that the response has been good to this.
Yeah, I definitely think that's right, and I think this is kind of an open and shut case in the leagues. I think where the problem lies is I really think that Adderall is probably extremely effective, and I don't see how you're going to stop people using it as they try to get big enough to go to these major leagues. That's the real problem I see. I could really imagine this being a massively rampant problem in older teens trying to become pro gamers.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Yeah, people could get started on it kind of before they hit the big time, and then, once they get into the tournament situation, they're then kind of reliant on it. I think the other problem, I don't know how good the testing is. It's been a lot of talk around pro athletics recently about doping, and a lot of those substances are very hard to test for. I don't know how reliable it is for Adderall, and I don't know how widespread the randomized testing is going to be. If people think, I might not get detected, or there's a good chance I won't be hit with the randomized testing, then the culture of using this will still continue. So they've got to be really careful about how they implement that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. They've got to get it right. And I think pro sports are just about starting to get it right now. They seem to have found the right level. So hopefully the ESL can just follow that lead.
One of the things that I kind of was very stereotypically esports about this was that it came out in this interview with this FPS player, Semphis. And if you've seen the video of this interview, the guy's just really casual, kind of like, oh yeah, of course we were all on Adderall, so that's why it sounded funny when we were all talking to each other. And that esports has this really weird, they have no media training. They
Right.
don't have any idea of that stuff they're saying is going to be controversial. And that's kind of just like so completely typical of how esports and pro gamers handle stuff. Everything's going to come out in this casual way.
Yeah, I'd like to see what happens when these guys get, big stars to the level that the pro gamers in Korea are, but certainly aren't here yet. Is that going to mean that they're going to go through more formal PR training, or are we just going to have a very individual kind of outlook for what these people come across as? It could be really interesting to see them when they're actually stars, people are actually paying attention to them. Do they start caring more about being a little bit more trained, or do they just go the other direction and not care at all?
I think there are some people, certainly in various scenes, who are very wise to this already. So I think the kind of more successful people are going to be having that media training. But you know how it is with football players. Like, some of them really are not PR friendly. They kind of go off the reservation quite a lot. I think you'll see that range of esports professionals where a lot of them are very straight down the line, very media trained, and some of them just continue with like the old ethos of saying whatever you want.
Yeah.
To kind of segue out of this, there was a pro League of Legends player who was suspended recently for boosting accounts for money. And this has been a problem in kind of all of the strategy game esports, and it's something that won't go away. Like, people really want their accounts boosted. There was a case in the StarCraft community of a player who paid someone else to play all of her matches online,
right,
and then kind of sort of sold her skills as a commentator based off that performance. Like, do you think this kind of thing is ever going to go away from esports? Will it ever get out of this heritage of like these kind of silly online stuff?
Well, I mean, not while they're not making enough money. People at this level are not generally making enough money. They're going to go to other avenues to get money. Obviously, boosting someone's account is a very easy way of doing it. There are more morally good ways of doing it. Like, they could do training, everything like that. And I think that's what also makes it very open to gambling. To match fixing, because just the vast majority of these guys are not making enough money to live on, and that's where you get this seedy stuff taking over.
Yeah, it's very easy for people to kind of come in and take advantage of that situation. I think we'll have to... esports is growing. It's very interesting. We shall keep an eye on esports issues as time goes on. Noted Street Fighter player and commentator Seth Killian has a new approach to fighting games, which he thinks can bring in a more diverse range of players. He hopes to increase the appeal of these games by removing the complex button presses and inputs currently required to pull off special moves. Ian Hardingham, is this the right way to improve fighting games?
I was really completely baffled by this, and I'm actually genuinely interested to find out what you're going to say about this, because the first sort of big game that I and we made was called Determinants, and it was this desire by me to fix some of the problems with Street Fighter fighting games. Yeah. And my perception of what was wrong with fighting games was never that it was too hard to do a special move. It was that there were so many moves. It took so long to learn the metagame, like how all these moves interact with each other and what you want to do at any specific time. I'm just completely baffled by this. I didn't think that was the problem, and I don't see how, if you make these special moves completely easy to carry off, they're not really special moves anymore. I just don't get this.
So I still think that this is a problem. I mean, Seth Killian's kind of background is largely around Street Fighter, and I think one of the major barriers to playing Street Fighter is certainly the mechanical skill that it requires to play. I think that's one of the problems. In the interview, he talks about some interesting stuff, which is low skill level players being able to engage in metagame behavior, like the viable uppercut throw game, which is kind of the lowest level of, like, you know, Shoto characters in Street Fighter.
Right.
People can engage with that without knowing how to do a fireball consistently. And I think that's interesting. It's not mentioned that obviously there is a game already which is predicated on this, which is Smash Brothers. And Smash Brothers is like the quintessential kind of simple input fighting game. And I think perfectly demonstrates why this approach brings with it its own range of problems. The problems that it brings are that it makes the metagame much more obscure, so it's much more based around knowing and exploiting things like frame data, how long moves take to happen, things like invincibility frames or armor, so if a special move starts and the character can't be hit in the first 10 frames, then a good player will know that, and so on. So it kind of immediately pushes it beyond the if there are two low-level Street Fighter players and one of them can do an uppercut properly and the other can't, that's like a good differentiator at the low level. So it doesn't seem to really take that into account for me.
Yeah, that really rings true with me. I think that by making every single move be the same difficulty to pull off, you're putting so much more pressure on the metagame, because you can't include sort of dexterity skill as part of the deal. It's going to make it a much flatter curve, and it's going to be harder for them to organise the metagame properly. So again, I just kind of sort of am repelled by this idea. I really just don't agree with it, and I'm surprised. You know, this guy's obviously, he's big in the community, right? He's a good player, he's a good commentator. So, and I read the comments on this article, and a lot of people were agreeing. Apparently, there's a lot of people who really aspire to be good at fighting games, but are turned off because they're not good enough at doing special moves, which I guess is the same as being an aspiring StarCraft 2 player and being put off because you can't do the micro properly. But that's just like being an aspiring tennis player and being put off that you can't hit shots properly. You know, it's just like that's so much part of the game.
I'm kind of with you to some extent. Like, I don't think that this is sort of going to solve the problem, really. But also, the problem that he is solving is an important problem to solve. Like, I think there should be more games. Like, there really is only Smash Brothers that does this. Correct me if I'm wrong, fighting game fans. But there's no other game which deliberately says, hey, here's all the specials. You can do them with one button. And now, you know, you go play the game. Like, there are skill-based movement things in Smash Brothers. Definitely. There's, like, button timing things as well. But there isn't, like, the kind of super complex inputs that you get in Marvel vs. Capcom or Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. So I want to see more fighting games that are like that, because I think that's an interesting problem to solve. But I don't, whether that's going to bring new players into the fighting game community or not, I don't know. The other side of this is, there's already a way of making games where you remove mechanical skill, and that's making turn-based games. And turn-based games bring with them this whole different level of comprehension and this whole different set of things that alienate or draw people in. So when someone kind of says, I'm going to solve this design problem, like, you can't solve the problems. It's always about compromising, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting time right now. It really seems to be this new indie resurgence in fighting games. So you're going to see, hopefully, a lot of creativity. Everything I've seen so far seems to be sticking to the formula like a little bit too closely. This is not, to me, that exciting a revolution in fighting games, but maybe in the next few months we'll start to see people starting playing with it really more. And I'll play his game and I'll see what it's like. It's interesting to see whether he will view it as in the specific genre of Smash, or if he really thinks this is a new genre.
Yeah, I think they're going for, like, this is simplified Street Fighter, certainly from the way it looks. By the way it looks is not good. It really isn't good. It doesn't look, the characters are kind of these very, like, dry, kind of underbaked robot things, and I don't think that's going to work. Like, it doesn't, I don't think that's going to appeal to people. A lot of people love the kind of Street Fighter 4 or 5 stuff because it's so over the top and dramatic and colourful and good players playing well look amazing. In this, it just kind of looks like a 2005 sort of tech demo-y game.
Yeah, it does, and it wasn't very appealing to me. And I also don't like it when I think this is a 2D fighter, and I don't like it when 2D fighters do a lot of playing with cameras in the third dimension, because it just seems to sort of undermine the nice flatness of the plane that everything's happening on. So that kind of put me off as well. But that's just
so, like,
subjectivity.
Do you mean even in kind of ultras, or do you mean during play? Like,
right. I mean, it bothers. It's just a personal thing. I don't like. It finds it anti-purist. I mean, I especially just don't like these sort of massive moves that happen once every round that sort of has all these ridiculous bells and whistles. That's always really, really bothered me. But that's just me being an old man, I think.
I think it works in Street Fighter. I think what they did in Street Fighter with Ultras to, like, have that be the only time that the character moves, that the camera moves, is interesting. Because it does give you, like, this huge reward, and also it has a kind of a really good effect on commentary, which people don't necessarily think about, which is that when the animation starts, because it takes such a long time to see the outcome, it gives the commentators time to say, is this going to kill, number one, like, or, you know, are they going to block it? So it actually, from a spectating point of view, I think it helps a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose everything about fighting games is pretty arbitrary and abstracted, and that's one of the interesting aspects of it. It's actually more like a board game in a lot of ways than it immediately appears, the fighting game genre, because it's taking so many different abstract rules, and you're talking about frame delays and hitboxes and everything, and it's actually like a really, really, really super abstract concept, and then trying to push it onto a very naturalistic aesthetic, and that powers some of my frustration with the whole genre, in that I think that gets in the way of the mechanics a little bit too often.
Yeah.
But sure, I by having something massive to denote this thing which is massive, that makes sense.
Friend of the show, Malakian, says he finds it difficult to watch competitive fighting games because he doesn't like the characters looking broken, because the moves that the players do are so kind of rapid and weird that they often kind of cut off animations, and he finds that a big turn off. And I think that kind of goes to what you're saying, like the actual game that the people are playing is completely unrelated a lot of the time to kind of the nice presentation of the game.
Yeah, there are so many real life cues in fighting games, like I am now blocking, I am now jumping, that sort of should be helping you understand what's going on. But I think fighting games nowadays are so complicated that they don't.
Head of Square Enix, Yusuke Matsuda, believes that it can take a long time to find the value in a new IP. In an interview with Famitsu, he said it takes at least 3 games in a series before you can judge its overall success. Is this true, Ian Hardingham?
This is quite a sort of a bold thing for him to say, and doesn't jive with a lot of traditional knowledge. So I read his comments sort of over and over to try and work out what he meant. It seemed that what he was trying to get at is that his approach is to not spend too much money on the first 2 games in a series, and only really massively up the budget when those 2 games have shown that the series can be successful. And that makes a lot more sense than this idea that you can't work out until there have been 3 games whether an IP is going to be good enough, or even possibly in the implication that 2 initial failed entries might not be enough to tell that the IP is bad IP until you have a 3rd one.
Right. I find this really fascinating because I think there's a lot of cases where, you know, the sequel, the second game in a series is the one that is profitable, and the first one is just something that maybe only gets critical traction and doesn't get commercial traction, or kind of is okay but isn't sort of profitable enough to really make a big dent. An interesting example is the fact that the decision has been made to make Mirror's Edge 2, when Mirror's Edge was the poster child of the Riticello kind of era EA experimenting with new IP that failed, but was kind of critically popular. So having this kind of hardcore metric of 3 games, I think there's something kind of attractive to me about that. Like I like the idea of a publisher saying, hey, you know, we've got to give these things space. We can't judge them well after the first iteration. I think 3 is too many. I think 2 is the number for me.
Yeah, I think, you know, we're trying to find useful stuff in this because it's such an interesting thing to say that it really makes you view some of this stuff from a completely different perspective. I'm still not completely sure that's what he actually meant. It's interesting that you brought up Mirror's Edge. I don't know what it is. I think there's this constant feeling with games like that which are critical. It's not really a critical darling, but that it has some very, very hardcore fan base that doesn't do well. There's sort of this desire to make it do well, that if you could really just get a sequel and suddenly bring it to the masses, and that you're the person who knows how to do that. I think there's such a draw in doing that, and I think it's generally a bad thing to do. But in this current climate, when everything is so much about remaking old stuff, who's to say that remaking Mirror's Edge, I don't necessarily think it's too soon.
Well, there's the familiarity problem in marketing terms as well, which is that people say they want new, exciting ideas, but they'll always gravitate towards something that they've seen before that has, you know, some existing memories attached with it, existing emotions attached with it. And with a sort of a number 2 in a series, a first sequel, you get that built-in boost. So even if the first thing doesn't do so well, you're kind of saying, hey, we've got something to rely on. We've at least got some parameters for this game. And I think that does happen quite a lot. Yeah,
I'd love to see some really good analysis of people who buy the second game who didn't buy the first game in a series. I'd really like to see how many people they are, what they're thinking about when they do that. Because I think you're right on a sort of a really casual level. I can think of many times where I've been like not attracted to the first product, but not just the initial marketing, but then a year or two of hearing people talk about it, it changes shape in my mind, it becomes more of an attractive prospect, and then I'm all in on the sequel. I'd like to see some research and find out what's actually going on there and how meaningful it is.
We haven't discussed like the elephant in the room here of the third game, and that elephant is called The Witcher 3, because The Witcher 3 was the absolute breakout of that franchise from being like, oh hey, there's this cool sort of weird RPG that has a load of problems, and if you like Bethesda games, you might like this kind of thing. It's a bit like underground, it's a bit weird. And then Witcher 3 was like the essential game of the time. It was as big as a as a Bethesda game, as an Oblivion. It was that big. So they managed to, by building that series, by building the fan base, they had this kind of built-in advocacy. And then 3 was just a genuinely, bigger, better attempt at that game. Plus they had all the goodwill. So maybe that's similar. Maybe that's a similar strategy.
I think you might have got 2 and 3 mixed up there. Which are you saying is the breakout? 2 or 3?
3.
3, right. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I was alive for the release of all 3 of those games, and the first one was, as you say, pretty weird. The second one seemed to be hitting more on the mainstream, and the third one certainly felt like a Bethesda release. A gradual building like that, it's nice to see something have that sort of meteoric a rise. So, yeah, I guess you're right. That is a good example of a third game that really proves the series.
I think a lot of it, like what I can't separate out though, is the approach versus the impact of it being number 3. Because I think Witcher 2 and Witcher 3 are just such, quantitatively different games that you can't really separate that out. If they'd done a Witcher 3 which was very similar to Witcher 2 in kind of scope and ambition, I still think it would have had a bigger impact, but probably wouldn't have capitalized on the goodwill to the extent that Witcher 3 did.
Sure, I mean, I'll buy Starbound 2 when it comes out, I'll buy Spelunky 2 if it ever comes out, I'll buy Hotline Miami 3 if it ever comes out, just because the thing with the sequels for me, and this might be a slightly different point, is that you sort of already know how to play them, so a lot of the hard work that you have to do at the beginning of playing a new game is somewhat gone, and that's one of the most attractive things for me. So even if the game is not going to be as good as another new game, I might be tempted to pick it up just because it's going to be a little bit less hard work to get into.
That's true, actually. There's a kind of understanding lag fear thing that people have where if they want to pick up something completely new, they worry about the time it'll take them to get into it, especially now with bazillions of games coming out. So that is definitely a sequel advantage.
Yeah, you want to have... You desperately want to play the new experience. You definitely want completely new games that do something completely differently. But then also, it takes so much time to learn them. I mean, that's just really the challenge of tutorials and learning processes. And because games traditionally do it so atrociously, people don't have a lot of faith that when they pick up something genuinely new, it's going to be easy to get into. So we could probably do a better job with that.
It's time to check in on the Xbone. Total Xbox One revenue grew in the last year by 27%, making it one of the better performing divisions of Microsoft as a whole. Having said that, it is still believed to be falling far behind the PS4, which is now at over 22 million consoles sold. Ian Hardingham, is it enough for the Xbone to be profitable and doing okay, or does it have to be number 1?
I don't know. I don't know what goes on in Microsoft. I don't know what they think is hugely important. I'm sure their public face is saying that everything's great and they're really wonderful, and no, we're not going to tell you what our sales figures are just right now, but take it from us, they're brilliant. But I don't know what they want internally. It's important not to forget how disastrous their plans for the Xbox One went. They wanted it to be this route to owning the living room to an even higher degree. They wanted it to be this massive partner to television. And that was what all of their stuff was based around. And unfortunately, by the time it arrived, no one was watching television on television anymore. So they've had to pivot it. They've had to just go back to basics to a certain extent. People seem to like the Xbox. I don't think it has too much of a negative connotation as it might have done at the very beginning. I know a lot of people who still just say Xbox when they mean modern console and aren't even thinking about the PlayStation. So I have no idea what their internal metrics are for it.
That's always the key thing with this. I mean, I think it's having a profitable console division in this day and age and not being Sony is kind of a great achievement. Like, that really proves that you're still in the game. And we know these things swing around, generation to generation anyway. So in the generation where you're perceived to have lost, to be profitable and to still have some kind of install base and some kind of foothold has got to be a success. I don't think at this point, realistically, they can expect to be the lead console. PS4 is such a strong offering. But to be there, and also, like you say, to go back to fundamentals, to try and work on improving the pathway for indie content as well, which they have done, I feel like the Xbone looks healthy, and it may be poised to kind of stick around for a while and actually have something meaningful to say in this generation. Again, I think what we're seeing is just how far divorced the kind of reality of things is from the gamer perception. Like, I think if you surveyed almost anyone, they would say that it was a disaster, that it was a huge failure, just because of the media sort of disaster and failure that they've had with it. So it's interesting to see that it's actually quite healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd probably get that answer from the sort of the relatively hardcore gamers and game watchers, although I think that your sort of average person on the street, your clubber who plays Xbox or whatever, I think it passed them by to a certain extent, and they heard rumblings that maybe PlayStation 4 had better graphics, but I think the extent to which those guys have existing favourites and support of either Sony or Microsoft is far more important than that. One of the most interesting things when you look at which console won a generation and then the successor to that console is that it's so usual that you lose the title belt the next generation. And a great piece of analysis on this sort of said it was just sort of really about hubris. You have that success and you believe you know what people want, and then you start doing weird things, and the company that lost is sitting there looking at the things that are actually important and working much harder at the fundamentals. And it's amazing if you look at it how seldom a platform holder is able to have the title 2 generations in a row.
That's completely true, and Cliff wrote a blog post recently about the difficulty of following up a successful game and just how much having a successful game limits your creativity, because you fear the kind of difference between that and a hypothetical sequel to your successful game. So every time you kind of approach that, you think, oh, but if I just did this, it would probably be more successful. And that's probably true of consoles as well. I think the company in the lead gets really hamstrung, and they either go like too safe, which ends up just being a very bad set of assumptions, or too wacky, which ends up kind of taking them entirely out of the race. I mean, Wii U, I think, which is kind of making a comeback now because it seems like they've figured out what that console's good for, was the sort of quintessential trying to consolidate in the wrong way. They took this big wacky leap with the Wii, and then they went, we've got to do the same kind of thing, and it just ended up being a compromise. So knowing when to consolidate and when to be innovative is just such a massively hard business situation. I don't think any big companies really know how to do it well.
Well, exactly, and I think that it's commonly called second album syndrome. Yeah. And I think that people are too obsessed with how hard it is to follow up a successful game and view it as almost a different thing to just how hard it is to make a successful game in the first place. So I think it's sort of, is it true that people end up making more mistakes because they're looking back at their previous success, or is it just so hard to have a hit in a hit-driven industry, it's so hard to make a successful console that you have a low percentage chance, and people just tend to internally overrate how much having had one success is going to correlate with having another?
I think a lot of that in general, if we go super general with that idea, it's down to how you had the hit in the first place. If you had the hit because your processes are really, really interesting and you're coming from a very well thought through but completely innovative direction, I think it can be more likely that you'll follow up with something successful. Whereas if it's just about exploiting a specific trend or a specific idea, or by accident almost entirely, then I think you as a person or entity is going to have a harder time doing any kind of meaningful follow-up.
Right, I think making a successful game or product is probably significantly more correlated with how many products you've made than the last product being successful, if you know what I mean.
Yes, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Head of Cloud Imperium Games, Chris Roberts, has written an update regarding the development of Star Citizen. In it, he acknowledges that the game has taken a lot longer to develop than originally promised, but says the reason behind this is that it has become much different. A bigger game thanks to the funders and open development process. It is possible that this update was a response to veteran developer and noted provocateur Derek Smart publicly cancelling his pledge and calling for an FTC investigation into how the funds were spent. Ian Hardingham, is it unrealistic for people to expect all money raised by crowdfunding to be spent on that specific game, especially in the case of massive overfunding?
Derek Smart is keeping it real here. This is great, and I will get on to him in a second. To answer your specific question, is it unrealistic for people to expect all money raised by crowdfunding to be spent on a specific game? No, I do not think that's unrealistic or unreasonable. I think that that's what the companies should be doing, and if they happen to have money left over and they can spend that afterwards, that's fine, and they should do that. I think you may disagree on this one, but I think that people are putting money in to help that game. Maybe if they like your company, they want you to do it on other stuff as well. But I certainly understand people getting angry about it.
I'm with you on this completely. I think if your value proposition to your customer is, hey, you pay this and we're going to make this great game, they don't want you to go and make like a tennis management game. They don't want that. Nobody wants that's mis-selling, right? Like it's very clear that you, and it's fine in the case of like we've seen stuff like with Gary Newman and Rust. Like people are kind of annoyed that he works on anything other than Rust. And that's a completely different situation to this. He's not saying when anyone buys Rust in early access, that means all of my time and energy is going to be spent on Rust. It doesn't mean that. He's just said early access just means that it will eventually be done. And you're paying for the version that exists now. This is totally different. This is all focused around a single product. And it's just like, it's ballooned out of all control now. He's trying to make at least 3 different games. I'd say probably around 5 games, given all the concepts that have been thrown out. And I think people are right to question that. Whether or not what they've seen so far matches up to what was originally promised and so on, that's really a matter for people who've backed the game and people who are kind of much closer to it and understand it. But I think you've got to be really careful when you're offering someone a specific core fantasy thing like this is, and then you're kind of deviating from it and using the money elsewhere. You've
made the right distinction, which is that when you're kickstarting a product, it's reasonable to expect all the money to go to that product, but when you're buying an early access title, then you don't really have that expectation. I think the lines get blurry, and I think that it's always been true that the inverted commas contract that you sign when you are buying an early access title is unclear. If you're buying an early access title by someone who's made a game that you love, you want them to be putting as much effort into it as possible, and a huge amount of ink and angry comments have been spilled about whether or not that's reasonable, and that is treated differently by every different kind of developer. The problem that I have is with Star Citizen is pretty simple, and it's actually what Derek Smart was talking about. They have 255 employees right now. They may be making an awful lot of money, but they are going to be in danger of overburning and not finishing this game, which sounds insane given how long it's taking and given how much money they've raised, but that's the real danger, and that's what I would be very angry about. As a Star Citizen backer, they had a good concept. If they'd stuck to a more pared down concept, they would have been much further along by now, and it would be amazing. We are really seeing a car crash in slow motion with this, and they are desperately pretending that bad things aren't happening, but they definitely are. We have a real risk here of the real tragedy, which is that it's never released, and it's just like these couple of weird half-demo things that we get out of it, which would be horrible.
I think what's going to happen is that at some point there's going to be a cull, and they're going to go, none of these things work. Half of the games that they're making will be cancelled, which means like a good chunk of the features won't happen, and they will eventually release a product, and I just don't think it can't live up to people's expectations now. That's physically impossible. What's so interesting to me about this is the comparison with Elite Dangerous, which a lot of people said was overambitious, but managed to come out as like a solidly spec'd, full, good game, which I just think is miraculous given the way that these things happen, and so surprising. And so they really have this kind of very direct and obvious competition from this other massively funded space game from a legendary developer. And I think in trying to differentiate themselves from that, they've just kind of wandered off into the forest of vagueness. And I mean, I believe a game will come out that's called Star Citizen, but what it will be, I have no idea.
And it really, the core problem is with these stretch goals, and it upsets me with so many Kickstarters, and it upsets me with this. How is it right that the more people that get involved with this product that I've supported, the less likely it is it'll be finished or good? How is that a cool feedback loop? I understand why you have stretch goals, I understand why you want more money, but they're so often the wrong kind of thing, and they're diluting the original vision, and it really sucks.
Yeah, I think that the stretch goal hate is real, and I'm kind of... My original problem with the whole stretch goals are bad thing was that I felt that was just... If you look at all stretch goals as a whole, they're probably bad, but that's because there are a lot of bad stretch goals. I didn't think the idea of stretch goals itself was bad, but to be honest, maybe I've changed my mind, because people abuse this so much now that almost every set of stretch goals, it's like, and we're going to make an RPG, and we're going to make this, and you're going to have customizable that, and you're going to, like, all of these features that just shouldn't be in the spec. It's like, when you're speccing something, there's a reason that you cut all of these crazy ideas. When you're making a game, you want to put in absolutely every feature and every facet that you think is good. And part of the process of making a game is self-denial, it's self-control. It's taking those things away and saying, actually, if I try and do this, it's going to send me down a rabbit hole for 2 years, and it means the game isn't going to be finished. But stretch goals directly, it's like a financial incentive to do bad design planning. So maybe I do hate stretch goals.
Yeah, I'm going to make an extremely silly analogy now. I think it's like, in some ways, it's being part of the Euro, where sometimes the right thing for your game and the right thing for your country is to make certain cuts, but because you are beholden to having promised this to your backers and somewhat being contractually obligated to do it, you're not able to make the right decision. You don't have the control that you desperately need to make a game, which is a very hard thing to do, and sometimes you have to do the hard thing within that. So... absolutely, I would love to see stretch goals that were like, at this stretch goal, there's a 75% chance this is actually enough money to finish the game. At this stretch goal, 90%. So, and be honest about it. Stretch goals which are like, no, you have a stretch goal, and it's like, if we get to this level, we'll cut all these features, because enough people will have paid for the game that we don't need to start promising this stuff. We'll be more likely to finish the game. It's the stretch goal that you want. You should just have percentage likelihood of completion as stretch goals. We fixed it. We fixed it, man. John Smedley has stepped down from his role as CEO of the company behind PlanetSide 2 and H1Z1, which, let's just, as an aside, is probably the worst game name of our generation. Smedley has been the victim of a protracted and extreme harassment campaign by the group known as Lizard Squad. The tactics employed by the group included grounding his flight with a false bomb threat and numerous swatting incidents. Ian Hardingham, your reaction to John Smedley stepping down? This is a pretty terrifying story. We all know that online harassment is one of the biggest problems of the new age, and there's nothing to laugh or joke about here. This is a guy whose life is being significantly ruined by the targeted attacks by some really bad guys who I don't even know what their actual problem with him is, and I don't think it particularly matters, but he's had to leave his job, he's had to have his life completely disrupted by guys who are basically terrorizing him. I think that the larger story, or rather the smaller story here, is about how passionate people can be about computer games, especially online console computer games, and how sometimes that can get the public faces of companies into trouble with them. But we need to, as a society, we need to do an even better job of sorting this shit out.
I think the legal situation is the problem here. I mean, swatting itself is just a kind of massive cauldron of mad, legally problematic stuff, and that needs to be sorted out in a clear way. And stuff like this, it doesn't tend to come out of the games communities. It tends to be people who want to cause trouble, latching onto a perceived cause and kind of just going nuts, or like picking a specific way, a specific outlet to do these terrible things that they want to spend time doing. And to be honest, I don't know how socially you can stop this. I basically don't think you can. I think you're always going to get this, particularly with teenagers and sort of younger disaffected people who want to have an impact. They want to do things that cause a big reaction because they feel alienated themselves, and it's a form of creativity, it's a form of response, and it's very negative. I don't think you can stop that. I think you just have to look at the other side of how you deal with it when it's happened. Unfortunately, because this kind of thing is now so common, I think we are going to see the law and society evolve in ways where, you're able to deal with this. And I don't think John Smedley particularly has had the kind of support that is necessary for someone in this situation. I think it's going to take a long time to get there.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this podcast into some massive reflection on what society is like now, but the extent to which your public actions are sort of trolled over and examined in such scrutiny by a huge number of people online, and almost everyone on the planet is voting whether or not what you're doing is okay, is such a amazing and occasionally terrifying new thing that we just haven't had before.
Yeah, absolutely. And games, like you say, arouse this kind of very specific passion, and they give people these causes to latch onto. I mean, I think to some extent, I was saying that it's difficult to prevent. I think community management can help with this. There are some developers and some communities who are better at making their community feel included and giving people a way to voice these concerns and responding to stuff. That is genuinely positive. Even in those communities, you get massive, community backlash against the developers all the time. But I do feel like that some companies are better at managing it than others, and that there are lessons learned. But whether that will really have a big impact in preventing this stuff, I have no idea. Microsoft's version of Solitaire for Windows 10 includes adverts and a free-to-play style in-game currency, both of which can be circumvented by paying a monthly or yearly subscription. Ian Hardingham, given that 90% of all apps on the Windows App Store seem to be some variant of Solitaire, is this a move to push people into using that instead of relying on built-in apps?
This is such a bizarre story. I had to check that it wasn't April 1st multiple times while reading about this. There are so many WTF moments. They're ads supporting the free version of Solitaire in Windows 10. They're allowing you to pay a subscription to remove the ads. It just seems like a sketch on a comedy show. I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea why Microsoft would feel the need to try and profit from this tiny, incredibly cheap to make pack-in that's like a big part of the Windows identity. At this point, it feels genuinely antagonistic to people. After the disaster that was Windows 8, Windows 10 is trying to sort of repair the face of Windows and of Microsoft. This is a punch in the face for everyone who wants to let them back in to their hearts and lives. It's disgraceful.
Well, I'm just I'm kind of with you in that I find this bewildering. I guess someone somewhere found out how many people are playing Solitaire and was like, hey, you know what we should do? I really think that's what it is. I mean, I guess so. It depends how bad the ads are. Doesn't it? I mean, everything has ads on it now. I just don't notice it. The only things I notice are when the sidebar on PC Gamer takes up the first third of the text, so I can't actually read it. Aside from that, I think I've now developed ad blindness, where I probably genuinely wouldn't have noticed this if I fired up Solitaire. I just don't know how bad it is. Is it full screen? Is it So there's that, and then this free-to-play monetization. I mean, do you need to subscribe to Solitaire? Who's going to do that? Maybe
I don't have a problem with creating a new version of Solitaire that you use to investigate whether all the 40-year-old people who play it are willing to become whales and what a Solitaire whale would look like. I'd have a problem with trying that, but don't do it with the one that comes with Windows 10. And again, especially not when you're trying to get past a load of ridiculous mistakes. This just seems like it's far more antagonistic than any possible benefit.
I think that's probably true. I mean, I don't think... If you're going to do this, then you do it. I don't think releasing Solitaire 2, Bejeweled Solitaire for free is kind of the way to do it. I mean, I agree with you. I think it's just going to annoy people, but what I'm trying to do is, like, this clearly doesn't make sense. I think that's obvious. Like, there's no way in which this is going to work ever. It's just not. If this works, I'll eat a joystick live on the show, because it won't work. If there was a way in which this could work, should they have done it like this? And I don't think so. But I probably don't feel as strongly as you do about that.
It's just like, honestly, I'm old and I'm stuck in the past, and I preferred it when it was all fields. And it sounds like I'm being funny, but I'm not. Like, so many things about Windows changing threatens me. I don't want this new Windows system. I like what I know. And just the idea that they can't even leave Solitaire alone genuinely upsets me.
Well, I think that's fair enough. I mean, like I say, I'm having to go through several hypothetical dimensions to come at a place where this might make sense. So when I have to do that, it's usually a bad thing, and I think this is a bad thing. PC hardware and peripheral developer Razer have confirmed that they have purchased part of Android console developer Ouya. The acquisition is believed to be for jumpstarting a library and distribution platform for their existing Android console, the Forge TV. Ian Hardingham, what do you think about Razer, Ouya, and Forge TV?
Well, it's always fun to talk about Ouya. I don't want people to forget that Ouya happened and how ridiculous the whole thing was. And it's actually restarted the free the games idiocy. You remember this was the thing where they ran this campaign that they would, up to $50,000, match your Kickstarter success for a game that was going to be released on Ouya, and just everyone found loopholes to abuse that, basically. And now that Razer is saying that they're not going to pay the money either, so that's just another hilarious and terrible part of that story. I find Razer a very, very interesting company that I have a lot of difficulty getting a handle on. They seem to be releasing new interesting products a lot. They seem to be in the media a lot in the last couple of years with a lot of very strange looking devices. They have this tablet thing that plugs into this weird spacecraft looking thing that's a controller that 3D matches what you're doing and everything. And they're doing lots of other things, and now they're trying to be this Android console that plugs into TVs. And I was talking to someone last night who suggested that maybe they were going to release a kind of keyboard and mouse peripheral that would be involved in this. And there are so many things about this that I find weird. Buying Ouya as a shortcut to getting a console library, I guess that's okay. They have some good games. Yeah,
right. Like, I mean, as much as this kind of doesn't make sense in that Ouya it's like buying a smashed limo. It's like a completely impractical thing that he's going to have time to repair a limo. It's just like, that part of it doesn't make sense. But yes, like, if they want to get a software library for cheap, then that's probably a cool idea. I mean, I love Razer. I think they're amazing. They do all kinds of stuff that is just completely mad, and we need that. Like, they really express a lot about what makes the PC good. They do a lot of innovative stuff for, kind of really niche markets, and that's cool. I just think, don't be distracted by this, Razer. What you need to do is just make a good lap board. I'm serious. This generation is all about the lap board. The first person that comes up with a killer lap board is gonna win, because we've got all this home streaming now. We've got Steambox coming out. We've got all these consoles. Just give me a lap board.
Do it for the kids, Razer. Yeah, I just wonder if they're very happy to continue doing these sort of relatively niche products, whether they've found a way of making that profitable and they just do as many new ones as they can, or whether they've got some of these things and they're hoping they hit the mainstream, because none of the things that they actually announce look particularly mainstream appropriate to me.
I don't think they're going for that. I think they're going for if you want a cool peripheral and you're in the PC space, then you buy a Razer thing. I mean, you've got a Razer keyboard, right? Like,
I do think I have a Razer keyboard. Yes, I do.
You got a Black Widow too.
I have two of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've managed to cross over, and there was this thing around some of their stuff that it wasn't high quality like years ago, and they really changed that. They really changed perception. They use really good components. They make stuff that people like. They do a massive amount of esports sponsorship. They're at every esports event. So I think they really, really know where their market is, and they're really going for it. And they're trying to innovate and do all this stuff. So Razer, like, good on you. If you can make something good out of Ouya, then go for it.
Actually, given that I completely forgot that the keyboards I have are Razer, that probably implies that they're kind of bigger than I was thinking. Like, so it has to be a certain size before you forget that you own one of their products.
Totally, they're a pretty significant company, actually, Razer. So like I said, I mean, I get very lost with all of these like new streaming services and micro consoles and what have you. And I think when you're in business development, it's not always a good idea to feel lost. I mean, I think probably I should know about these things. I should know who's doing what. And then I kind of think, well, the leaders are going to emerge, and that's what I was always saying about Ouya itself when it came out. It's like, I don't think this is going to work, but I'm not going to call it failing because it might work, and then it might be the thing that comes from outside and disrupts everything, and it turned into a disaster. I think it's very easy to naysay about these kind of potentially super disruptive things, so I've got a bit like off my high horse about that stuff now. Roguelikes now. One element of the original Rogue, which doesn't see much light in other roguelikes, is the religion metagame, specifically choosing a deity and adjusting your style to better fit the requirements of that deity. Ian Hardingham, why isn't religion an essential component of the roguelike or roguelite or roguelike in the way that procedural levels and permadeath are?
This is quite a subtle point, so I hope that you can keep up. What I find really interesting about this article, and I will praise it for you and the listeners, is the idea that in modern roguelikes and games that are take some components of roguelikes, and are games as well, there are a lot of ways that you have different challenges and different game modes and different takes on the central game mode that you select before you play the game. So in Frozen Cortex, by completing the game in one way, you then unlock the ability to play a different game mode, and the game keeps track of your scores and sort of enforces it in that way. What I really like about this element of classic roguelikes is that they have all of these game modes and these different ways of playing the game, such as, for instance, not killing anything or not using any red magic, or the kind of challenges that we see in games all the time. They have them always running, and they are enforced by this concept of deities. And just a lot of really, really nice things about that. The idea that rather than it being a hard thing you choose at the beginning, it's something that you can do as you go through, and that it's another way in which roguelikes don't tell you anything to start with, but can drip feed you information. So you might finish a level in an old roguelike and have deity John X is pleased with you, and you were like, okay, so what did I do? And it just is a really roguelike way of doing things, and I think it's really nice and sort of worth discussing.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in the more general points here. So just to clarify for the listeners, we read an article in Paste magazine by this guy Mark R. Johnson, and he's really kind of drawing some contrast between the new batch of roguelikes, which I think he calls like procedural dungeon death games or something. Like he kind of
he used that as one term, but he actually referred to them as modern roguelikes,
sure,
and
okay.
Old ones as classic roguelikes.
Right, gotcha. So a lot of it is about the contrast, and this thing about religion, like I definitely like this. I mean, Isaac is probably the modern game which incorporates the most of this meta stuff, and I think it's a really nice hook for kind of long-term players. Having an overbearing mechanic that sort of affects all of your micro decisions in the context of a playthrough, I think is really cool, and I would like to see more games do that. It just puts a nice inflection on your actions. Anytime when you have to weigh up your kind of more micro actions against a greater consequence, I think is always an interesting decision.
Yeah, I just thought it was a really nice aspect, and it'll be nice to talk about some things like this on the podcast, more about just aspects of certain genres which are nice.
Definitely, more mechanics. RPS posted a discussion about the best levels in PC gaming, with a particular emphasis on first-person games such as Thief and Deus Ex. Ian Hardingham, what did you think of their choices of best level ever, and do you have any top levels?
I do have some top levels noted down. I'm not really surprised that games like Thief and Deus Ex dominate this list. They're just games with absolutely iconic levels that make you feel all sorts of emotional things and are really great. I mean, there are probably 10 different Thief levels across the games that I completely love. But I'm going to start off by saying one which is definitely not my favourite level, not the Cradle from Thief 3, which I think is the most overrated level of all time, and I have no idea why it's so popular. It's really a cheap fairground horror ride. I'm sorry for those of you who find that opinion offensive. Probably my favourite Thief level of all time is Thief 2 level, where Garrett finds himself in the Lost City from Thief 1, and there's just this brilliant moment where he thinks he's being taken somewhere really weird and actually just manages to find himself in this place that he already knows. We've got Hostiles from Half-Life 1, where the Marines first turn up, is amazing. There's a level in Far Cry 1 where you have to set off a nuke under a couple of bases, which is great. Facility, the second level of GoldenEye, is awesome. And Tribe 2's Tombstone level are my favourites.
Wow. That's quite an array. So those are your choices. I'm gonna start predictably by criticizing other people as opposed to offering anything of my own. And I'm gonna say first up, Alice for RPS picks Hell's Kitchen as the best ASX level, and I just have to say that is completely correct. Like, everyone says Liberty Island is good. I don't think Liberty Island is a very good level. I think it's an interesting level. It's not very good. Hell's Kitchen is brilliant. It's one of the first times in a game where you can ever kind of go around. You go into all these different buildings, and there's a hotel, and you jump out of the fire escape, and you're there. And then there's like the back alley bit and the sewers, and it just feels like this really interesting place, and it's where a lot of the interesting plot stuff really kicks off in the game. And it really throws a curveball of like, what kind of game is this going to be when you're exploring it. So Hell's Kitchen, completely correct. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have Alec Meir with saying that Zen from Half-Life is the greatest level of time. It's just such obvious.
That is trolling. That really is.
It's just such obvious bait, but I have to take it. Like, there's no. It's such a kind of revisionist, like, clever thing to say. Oh, Zen is good. Zen has never been good. It never will be good. It's just a level comprised of bad jumping puzzles. Not only that, bad jumping puzzles with altered physics, aka the worst thing ever in any FPS. It's not good. So, Alec, I'm sorry, just no. Moving on from that, I'm going to give you probably my favourite level. I did agonise over this, but I'm just going to go for one. I'm going to go for the Opera House level in Hitman Blood Money, because I've never seen anything in a game that quite provided you with that sense of scope, that sense of a system where you are kind of really properly messing with the system. Just the thing where you can replace the prop gun with the real gun and then go up onto the balcony and watch the assassination take place and watch all the chaos. And you can burst on stage and snipe the guy in the audience from the stage and run away. If you do it the opposite way around, it's such a beautiful piece of mechanics meeting architecture meeting emotional level design. So that is my choice for best level of all time.
Nice choice. We're going to trial a couple of new regular features on Visiting the Village now, and the first one is one that I suspect Paul doesn't like because he's getting me to present it, so I don't know how long this is going to survive, but here we go. Thanks to Eurogamer, every week we're going to tell you the games that were released this week 10 years ago. So 10 years ago this week was 2005, for you guys not paying attention. We had one of the Asheron's Call expansion packs, quite a lot of versions of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, quite a lot of Worms, a game called Infinite Sudoku, I can't imagine what that is, and a couple of Crash Bandicoot games, and Sid Meier's Pirates on the Xbox. Paul Taylor, do any of those arouse your interest?
No. Not really. I mean, so Asheron's Call Throne of Destiny, is that an Asheron's Call expansion pack?
Yes, I'm almost certain that it is. So,
I mean, Asheron's Call is like part of the history of abandoned MMOs, I guess, that people never talk about anymore. I mean, I always get it confused with EverQuest.
Yeah, I think they were around at the same time, and they were sort of... I think EverQuest was certainly more popular, but Asheron's Call had a lot of believers. I actually slightly doubt that Throne of Destiny is the last expansion pack. I think Asheron's Call still had expansion packs going past 2005. It had a very, very long tail and quite a few subscribers for a long period of time.
Sid Meier's Pirates on the Xbox is the curveball of the pack, I think, here, because I definitely don't remember that happening. And also, like, 2005 is pretty early for the kind of classic PC game to console conversion, and it's not Pirates Gold either. which I think is possibly significant. I've never played Sid Meier's Pirates.
Yes, I think that is significant, although I'm struggling to remember the significance of it specifically. And there was still being games being released on the GameCube in 2005, which is heartening to see.
That is heartening. Yes. So, are we done with this now?
Yes, you can ring the bell.
Okay. Good. Right, it's time for the top 5 Steam games in the UK, and we're going to talk about these. So number 1 is Ark Survival Evolved. Number 2 is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Number 3 is Victor Vran. Number 4 is Rust, and number 5 is Garry's Mod. So Ian Harding, let's start with Ark Survival Evolved. Now, I kind of lamented this as like another iteration of the sort of survival-y, rusty, the foresty DayZ genre, and you said this is the one, if you were going to play one, you would play this one. So why do you like this game?
Well, I think the dinosaurs are cool, and I thought that it had like a nice hook. I mean, it's no surprise now that you've got a good chance of having a top-selling Steam game if you nail the survival genre, especially if you nail the multiplayer survival genre, which Ark is. It's been hovering around the top of the charts for quite a long time now. I'm sure it's made a huge amount of money, and it's obviously very successful. People seem to like it quite a lot, and I think that, you put dinosaurs in DayZ, and you're going to have a pretty big success.
Dinosaur Z. Counter-Strike being back is, I mean, Global Offensive is kind of, they've really accomplished what they wanted to with making an esport. Like Valve are kind of the kings of forcing esports to happen, which they managed with Dota, and they've now really cemented Counter-Strike as a great esport. And I think that's probably behind this resurgence. I mean, I'm guessing it was on sale or something, or
yeah, I'm super happy about that. I really thought that CS was dead a few years ago, and it's one of my favourite games of all time. And then Global Offensive started off being mildly offensive, but is now pretty good, I think. And
now it's globally offensive.
It's globally inoffensive, so that's really good.
Okay, Victor Vran is probably the most interesting game on the list. So this is the kind of Diablo-esque action RPG with jumping. It was a key differentiator from Diablo. Apparently it's kind of a lot more freeform. It looks like really fun sort of twist on the genre. I guess you've got Torchlight, sort of the main competitor. I think aside from Torchlight, it's a little bit underserved. There was a really interesting indie space one that happened ages ago that nobody talked about, and the name of which I've forgotten. So that's the only other notable into the genre.
Are you thinking about Space Siege, maybe?
Something like that. It had a little space dude with a ray gun going around, and he could. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, I'd never heard of Victor Vran. I had to look it up today, which was a surprise. And something it lets you do is it lets you rotate the camera. So it's got a traditional Diablo perspective, but you can rotate the camera, which is awesome.
Right, yes.
And I want to see in Diablo 4. And with the last 2 entries on this, Rust and Garry's Mod, do you think Gary Newman can pay his rent this month? What do you think?
Oh man, like I don't know what it's like to be Gary Newman. I mean, he's on Twitter a lot. He's pretty funny on Twitter. He seems like a good guy. I've had some nice chats with him.
He needs to buy a house next to Notches, I think.
Right, but he just doesn't seem like someone who would do that. I think his Twitter still says Walsall, so he lives kind of in the West Midlands. I mean, the difference between Walsall and LA, like, is quite significant as you choose your base. I have lived in Walsall as well. I mean, more power to him. I just think if you had come up with like number 1 least likely to follow up success, I think you would probably go with Garry's Mod. Like, you would have gone, okay, that's a freak. That is a freak incident. There's no way that guy could come up with something else that's as popular. And then he goes and makes Rust. And
I totally agree. I think you're right. It just didn't seem like he was going to hit the big time to completely the same level again, but he did.
Well done, Gary. Right, now it's time for your questions. And we're going to open with this one from MYIDOS, or MyDOS, don't know how you say that, on Twitter. And he says, Ian Hardingham, how do you think you could improve your turn system for players, and will you ever open source it?
Yeah, so this is a great question, and that's good, because most of the questions we got were silly questions. However, I don't know. I was sort of taken by surprise by this. Cortex allowed me to really refine the turn-based system from FS. So the biggest thing that I added was the ability for turns to be variable length. So turns to basically end when something happens in the turn rather than after a specific length of time. Apart from that, I actually have to say I'm pretty bullish on how good it is, how featureful it is. I love the email system. I love that we've got a proper chat system now if both players are online, and the server stores the messages, and everything seems to work pretty well. I know a lot of people still get really upset when people don't take their turns quickly, and a lot of people would rather you could be much more specific about saying you want to play a game quickly. And I still think about that a lot, but I still also think that the ability to go and answer the door or have a cup of coffee, or specifically be able to start playing one of our games knowing that it's not a necessity that you then finish it straight away, is something that's really, really great. So I don't think we're going to change that.
I still want to know how people react differently to that. Like, I would still be interested to know if we launched a game with time limits on, what would happen to that game. Like, would the people who want the no time limit thing, do they outweigh the time limit people? It's just not something that we've ever explored, and I would like to know that still.
Yeah, it's tough to get the data on that. I mean, I can sort of only react emotionally and with very, very inconsistent data from having talked to individual people. Knowing what the right answer there is really hard.
It is really hard. I started playing Hearthstone again yesterday, and I definitely appreciated the time turns in Hearthstone. But like you say, it really confines when you can play those games. I think I'm in favour now of, if I sort of pick my multiplayer flavour, I like short but time-limited encounters. Short but time-limited matches are really, really good to fit in between other things. Like, that you can fit a match in 5-10 minutes. I think is quite a good unit. So maybe one day we could make a game like that. I don't know.
Fair enough.
Right, Alex Connolly asks, have you noticed differences between the FS and FC communities? Much player overlap? I think we've had a fair amount of player overlap, actually.
Yeah, I think at the top level, a lot of the guys who are still playing FS at the top level took on Frozen Cortex and seemed to really like it. And lots of people who liked FS tried Frozen Cortex. There are still a couple of sort of very, very high meta game problems with FS. Certainly the distraction exploit, which I'll be fixing in some way soon. It causes some problems with the very sort of long-term playing of that game. I don't think Frozen Cortex has problems like that. That's how I answer that question.
I think we should be looking into doing more to bring over some more of the FS community to Cortex, actually. So that's something that I quite like to think about, because I think quite a few people in the FS community didn't try Cortex because they didn't want to play a game that was about sort of robot sports in some way. But I think it might be worth looking into talking to that community and getting more of them playing Cortex. It's just something that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about sort of putting Cortex as a sort of a random game mode into FS as an entry level drug to Cortex, right. And that's something I keep playing around with in my mind. I think that's kind of a really interesting idea. I think it has some legs.
That definitely could be interesting. Low Dinosaur says, I'd like to hear your thoughts on how modding can spawn entire genres and guesses on which set of tools will bring the next genre. Why do we always get questions about modding? We get like a question about modding like every time we've ever asked for questions. I'm not annoyed. I'm just speculating as to why that be. I think modding is like this thing that people really want to know about. I find it really fascinating. What do you think about modding, spawning genres and tools and stuff?
Yeah, it's been a long year, I won't lie. My brain's quite tired, and trying to come up with answers to this question is I'm struggling right now. I mean, Unity is such a massively great tool for people who don't have a lot of experience to make games, and yes, people who do have experience as well, that it's interesting to try and sort of wrench yourself out of that headspace and think about modding. The Unity editor, I think, will be allowed to be used for modding on some level, and I think that's going to be useful. But the question, like, modding spawns new genres and stuff when a new game comes out that you can mod, which has a feature which hasn't happened before, and people can suddenly start using that feature in different ways. So stuff like the first time you had an online game that was moddable, people just started really subverting and perverting those kind of features. So I don't know what the next game can come out. Of course, Half-Life 2 had physics. Modding that is going to have everyone's take on physics, etc., etc. I don't know what the next big feature that doesn't exist in games yet is that will be taken by the modding community and run with.
That's a really good point, actually. Yeah, I mean, I always feel sad about how Blizzard really overpromised and underdelivered with the StarCraft 2 modding set, because they came out with this thing of like, they showed someone making it was like a shooter, and then they were like, oh, you can sell these on Battle.net. And I thought that was a really good idea. Like, I thought it was really nice. But for some reason, they didn't ever really give any prominence to mods within Battle.net. I think they really wanted to just focus on the core game, which kind of makes sense. But the community rage around that was enormous and endless. So I think they kind of slightly missed a trick there. Maybe the StarCraft editor isn't as good as it could have been, isn't as user-friendly. I mean, I think... You're so right, like Unity has really kind of made a lot of this moot. I'd be interested to see if a big game came out and the developers provided tools for really making simple games, like almost like a kind of Games Factory level thing where it's so easy to just place the existing assets and maybe kind of clip together bits of logic and stuff so that it's genuinely different from Unity.
Just to get back to the StarCraft 2 thing, because I think I have a different concept. I was really offended when they started talking about that you could make a first-person shooter in StarCraft, and it's like, I would much rather StarCraft 2 was the definitive RTS engine, and they just worked as hard as they could on making that the best thing it could possibly be. And StarCraft 1 was a brilliant modding tool, and I made a couple of fun RTS game modes. Absolutely loved it. I just saw no reason why you would need to make a shoot 'em up or a first person shooter in these tools, and I just sounded like the engineers getting a bit overexcited, and especially not now you have Unity or other engines like it to make full games. You don't need StarCraft to help you make FPSs, if you know what I mean.
The StarCraft 1 editor was good. I actually made a playable single-player level in that. So that was closer to what I'm talking about, actually, the kind of... it's so easy to script logic. Yeah, you're right. Like, focusing on making games of different genres is just really novelty and just an engineer porn. It's nonsense. So, focusing on making kind of isometric games or RTSs could have been good for that. A hamster asks, what are your thoughts about Windows 10, which is the topic du jour, and Microsoft's attempt to get back to PC games? Will it be ignored? Hopes and fears? I don't know too much about this. I mean, Windows 10 is supposed to be a kind of back to classic Windows attempt to undo the terrors of Windows 8. If that's true, then that's going to be good for games. I don't have many thoughts beyond that. I don't understand why everyone's updating to it today. It's like the last thing I want to do is update my OS, ever.
Yeah, so, exactly. If you're listening to this and you're thinking of doing it, how about you just hold off for a bit? I don't think that comes with anything particularly amazing. It's very nice that Microsoft want to save PC gaming again, but aren't we a bit past that? I mean, I kind of think that sort of Steam and PC Gamer are sort of reasonably healthy right now. I'm not that interested about their sort of new cross-promotional attempts with Xbox Live and everything. The last time they did stuff like that, it led to Games for Windows Live, which was, I mean, like genuinely one of the worst things that could happen. So as far as I'm concerned, they're going to have to do something good, and that's not charging a subscription for Solitaire before I even pay any attention to their PC game space.
Yeah, I don't know where that's going to go. Right, that's the end. We're going to wrap it up now. You can talk to us on Twitter. I'm Mode7Games. He's Ian Hardingham. And we would like your questions for next week. We hope you've enjoyed this week. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, thank you for listening, and please listen again. Goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.